Greetings, fellow Watford fans. Omar here, and it's time for the youorns 10-minute take on Watford nil, Preston North End nil. And it was a drab game, really a game where quality stayed at home, and Watford stayed at home as well. Not at Vicarage Road, they stayed in their hotel rooms, or maybe they stayed in their own homes, in their own beds, because Watford never really got going in this game. This was a prime opportunity for Watford to start their serious challenge for a playoff spot. At the start of play, they were 2 points behind the last playoff spot in the championship. And now, as a result of this game, they sit 4 points behind the final playoff spot with 11 games left. But Watford did not make a meaningful impact in this game, especially in the first half. They played as if they were already on the beach 11 plus games early. And that is not the kind of mentality that you want from your team with so much at stake. It's not that Watford, it's not as if Watford are 15 points behind the last playoff spot, but that's what they played like today, especially in that first half. And that is something that you cannot afford to have if you call yourself a team with ambitions to make the playoffs. The ambitions for Watford now have been scaled down and backward in each successive last few games. At first, we began the season and it was, we're going to win a title. That's what we're looking for. We're not only looking for promotion, we're looking for a title. Rob Edwards was saying things like that at the beginning and before the season began, and look where Rob Edwards is now. Then we began to say, okay, well, we're not going to win a title, but we can do this automatically. In fact, I was one of the people who was saying, yes, Watford are going to be there for automatic promotion when the season ends. Well, that's not going to happen either. And so it went backwards from automatic promotion to playoffs. And many of us as Watford supporters were saying, yeah, you know what, we've got the quality. And when we get these lads who are injured back into the fold, we'll be in the playoffs, no problem at all. Well, you can guess what the response to that is now. This game was very forgettable in the first half. Very forgettable. So there's really no use in talking about the first half. The second half, at the beginning of the half, substitutions were made, and you had Arouge come off, and you had James Morris coming off, neither of whom were particularly effective in the game overall, but no Watford player really was for the most part, except for João Pedro in that first half. And on came Keenan Davis, and in addition to Keenan Davis coming on, you had, and I can't believe I'm drawing a blank on the other player coming on. It was Espria, pardon me. And Espria came on, and they looked like they put a bit more in the proceedings. I thought they added some dynamism and energy, particularly Espria, whom I just don't understand why he was left off this squad. I know what the excuse was and what we were told by Slaven Bilic, but to me, it doesn't justify this when the stakes are this high. He cannot leave impact players like Espria on the bench, off the squad and in the under 21s. There's no reason for that. This is a young lad. He's not 45 years of age. He's 18. And it just didn't make sense to me why the manager did that in the first place. Espria showed you why he does bring value, and he certainly did energize Watford in the second half of this game. They did have 15 minutes, I think, of very good football, had a few chances, disrupted the defense of Preston, whose objective in this game was to sit fairly compact and defend the block and keep Watford at bay. That's exactly what they managed to do, as they did back in August of this past year when they also drew 0-0. And Espria was one of the few bright spots in that second half. But to no avail, Watford could not find a way through. It wasn't that they didn't try. They did have the 15 minutes, but really that was all in that second half. They just did not get enough of this job done, because I just don't think Watford were intense enough in this game. They weren't intense enough. They didn't come out desperate. It's not about the performance this stage of the season. It's about the fact that you have to scrape and scratch and claw and dig deep. Watford didn't do that today, and that's why Watford didn't get these points. And that's why Watford now are struggling even to contend for a playoff spot. So, as I said earlier, we've gone backwards now in successive blocks of the season. The aspirations were title. Then they were promotion, automatic. Then they were playoffs. And now, as I said a few moments ago, they are 4 points off the playoffs now with 11 games to play. Not the end of the world. They can still do this. But the way that Watford are going right now, and the way they have gone this entire season through these first, 35 games, shows you that they do deserve to be exactly where they are right now. And that's in 9th place. Ninth. That's where Watford are right now. With all this quality, with all this skill, with all of these players, Watford are in 9th place. And the reason they're in 9th place is that they don't give a strong enough effort. Effort is more important than performance. Effort is the thing. Because you can actually have a decent performance without really bringing the maximum effort that's required to get you over the line. And with a good performance, you can sometimes still lose these games. But if you give effort, no matter what, you have a chance to win these games regardless of your performance. And the problem with Watford this entire season is that they have not given maximum effort. They have not given an effort, and they've not given it, not just from game to game, they've not given it. They've not given it from 15-minute periods of the same half to 15-minute periods of the same half. They literally have not sustained more than, with the exception of 2 games I can think of right now, the game against Stoke that was Bilic's first in charge, and the game against the hated rivals from up the M1, have not given a consistent effort throughout a half of football in this championship season, except for those 2 games I mentioned, and much of the game against Sheffield United to start the season. Other than that, they have gone absolutely backwards. They do not have a team on the field that is bringing forth maximum effort. There was no desperation out there except for maybe 4 players on that pitch today. 4 of them. João Pedro was one of them. Asprilla was another of them. Ryan Porteous was another of them. Ken Sema was the other of them. 4 of those players. There may have been one other, perhaps. You might say Chowdhury, you might say Loser, but Loser's impact on the game was not as strong today as it could have been, and I think that's because Preston did their homework on him. But the bottom line is that for the most part, this lot played like a bunch of individuals today. And I'm talking about this lot meaning Watford. And at home, the energy was very poor from Watford. The intensity was very low. You would have been forgiven for thinking that this was a pre-season friendly. The Watford fans at the Vic today were not impressed. They were not having it. The atmosphere was not good, and that's because the players didn't raise their game. How do you expect Watford fans to be jumping up and down for you and cheering you if you're not giving them anything to cheer about? And when you don't imply your intensity, or you don't apply your intensity, there's no application of intensity, no application of desire, no sense that this game was an urgent situation for Watford. And when you've got no intensity, when you've got little effort, when you've got no application, and when you've got no sense of desperation or urgency, how on earth are you going to win these games, let alone these games at home? And everyone was saying in a Watford shirt, including the manager, well, this is a game we must win. We've got 3 out of 4 games at home. This is our opportunity. Now, your opportunity has been all season. And the thing is, you have absolutely thrown it in the bin. And that's the problem here. You can't wait until the final 11 games or 10 games or 12 games of a football season to then talk about how you've got these games at home that you must win. Well, you should have won the Rotherham game. That was a must-win game. You had a game at home against Blackburn. That was a must-win game. You had a game at home against Swansea. That was a must-win game. You had a home game against Millwall. That was a must-win game at the Vic. It really doesn't make a difference now in game number 35 or 36 to start talking about, well, we've got 3 out of 4 left at home. The next 3 out of 4 at home against teams we should beat. Well, this was a team we should have beat today. I know Preston's a good team, good defensive unit. They are. They went their first 7 games of the season without conceding a single goal. But Preston North End now have fallen down to the ranks of the also-rans. And the problem now is the Watford are in very grave danger of doing exactly the same. Coventry are now ahead of Watford. We have to go to Coventry to play them in the next few weeks. The lot from up the M1, they're ahead of us. They are comfortably ensconced in the playoff spots. And they have the manager that we sacked after 10 games. And it really would be poetic justice, quite frankly, if it ended up that Rob Edwards and that lot that he manages up there now end up in the playoffs while we don't. And right now, if you ended the season with this 0-0 draw against Preston, that is exactly what you'd have. Ismail Assar, for me, has to be benched. Yes, he is a skilled player. Yes, he dazzles on the international stage as he did in the World Cup for Senegal. But he doesn't do this consistently enough in a Watford shirt. He does not fight for the ball when the ball is being contested. I've talked about this before. He doesn't jump for the second ball. He doesn't want to make a tackle. He's afraid to do that. He is not the kind of player that is willing to risk himself when it comes to doing the dirty work. He doesn't want to do that. He doesn't do enough of it. And as a result, you have a player who was purchased a few years back for £35 million, who now has depreciated in value as a saleable asset. And he has done that in a blink of an eye over literally the last couple of years since he was the Graham Taylor Watford FC Player of the Year, Player of the Season in 2021, when Watford went up. He was the man who scored the penalty that got Watford into the Premier League against Millwall. And now here we are, almost 2 years later, and that player that was the Player of the Year is really a shell of himself now. He is not the same person. And Watford will not get decent value for him in the transfer market because he's going to leave in the summer. That's my prediction. I think João Pedro will as well, no matter what happens to Watford in terms of where they finish. Ismail Assar, to me today, had 10 good minutes and 80 forgettable ones. And that is usually how it's been with Sarr for a lot of time this season. You wouldn't know that this is actually the player who scored 9 championship goals this season, tied for first place with the most goals on this Watford team. You wouldn't know that based on some of these performances from Ismail Assar. You have to be willing to do the dirty work on both sides of the ball. And Ismail Assar, as a player, has not yet learned to do that, or doesn't want to do it, or doesn't appreciate or respect what it takes to do those things. Nobody wants to say this about Ismail Assar. Well, there are a number of Watford fans who do, besides myself. But a lot of the people who are closer to Watford Football Club or who broadcast for Watford Football Club won't come out and say those kinds of things. And there's obvious, understandable reasons why. Tommy Mooney, however, came the very closest today to saying those things without mentioning Sarr's name. And I'm paraphrasing now. He said, You're going to have to want to do the things in football that people do not like to do. You have to be able to snap into a tackle and challenge for the ball. And that's clearly who I'm sure, I bet you he had in mind, Ismail Assar, because Ismail Assar doesn't do that. He jumps out of tackles. He jumps over tackles. He hurdles over tackles. He doesn't jump for the ball. He doesn't want to get stuck in. And I'm sorry, you can't have a player like that on your books anymore. Ismail Assar has done some wonderful things at this club, but for me now it's time to move him on at the end of this season and see what little value you can get for him now. And look, I still think there'll be Premier League clubs coming in for him, but entertain the offers. I mean, I think you need to now move on. And I think this club and this team is in rebuilding mode in the first team for the men. And they have to start doing that. And they're behaving like that now. And so the bottom line is that Watford today, and Tommy Mooney, one thing I do disagree with him on is that this was a Watford side who in the second half gave you an all Watford performance. It was all Watford in the second half. It was only all Watford for 15 minutes of the second half. And Preston North End, had they been halfway decent, could have nicked a win here easily. And that should never be the case. No intensity from this Watford team today. And the reason why they are in ninth place is because they don't apply themselves consistently and they do not bring consistent intensity to these games. It's as simple as that. They are not fighting for each other as a team on a consistent basis. Now, they did that against West Bromwich Albion a couple of weeks ago, but they didn't do it at Sheffield United last week, and they didn't do it today. They've now failed to score in these last two games. Keenan Davis is nowhere to be found. When it comes to the goals now, he's not scored since October, so he's now moving into 6 months almost without a goal. At least, well, 4 months without a goal for Keenan Davis. Nearly 5. I mean, it's appalling. It's appalling. Nobody's finding the back of the net anymore. No one has the confidence. The passes today were short. They were not reaching their targets. The final third, the finishing, poor. The final ball, poor. The execution going into that final third of the pitch, poor. I think it's really time now to be honest and say what needs to be said, is that this team is not fighting for each other and is not bringing the kind of effort and intensity that is required to win championship games. It's as simple as that. They've got the quality. They've got some good players, international footballers, players at the World Cup, players capable of scoring wonder goals, Ismail Assar. But they don't have players who consistently apply themselves to winning football matches as a team. And if you don't have players who consistently bring an effort to these games, consistently recognize the urgency and the desperation required in these games, you're going to have a team that ends up in the championship next season. And the bottom line is that's where Watford are heading. And there are lots of Watford fans, and I have to say I'm one of them because I talked about this at the beginning of this season, who think that it is better for Watford to build a 3 to 5 year plan, even if that means being in the championship for the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, even if that means going down to League One, for heaven's sake, for a season. Better to do that than to play the charade that's being played now, yo-yoing between Premier League and Championship. Because really, aside from the obvious parachute payments that you get and the money that you get, right? Apart from that, there's no reason to do this if you don't have stability and a foundational base. And at the end of the day, that comes down to one person and one person only, Gino Pozzo. This has been the YouOrns 10-minute take.